The security guard's cheerful greeting bounced off the marble walls of Ashford Technologies' lobby, but Marcus Reed barely registered it. His daughter's small hand squeezed his as they crossed the threshold into another Monday morning, another week of walking on eggshells. Emma's backpack, decorated with a faded dinosaur patch she'd insisted on keeping despite its fraying edges, bumped against her shoulder blades with each step. She was humming something under her breath, oblivious to the weight pressing down on her father's chest. The elevator doors were sliding open when Marcus saw her. Victoria Ashford stood near the executive bank of elevators, her dark hair pulled into that severe low bun that never seemed to have a single strand out of place. The tailored charcoal suit probably cost more than Marcus's monthly rent. She wasn't looking at them, not directly, but her eyes tracked their movement across the lobby with the precision of a predator noting prey. Marcus braced himself. 4 months of this. 4 months of cold stares and cutting remarks and the constant feeling that he was one misstep away from being fired. Tori's heels clicked against the polished floor as she altered her trajectory, intercepting them near the main elevators. Her expression remained neutral, almost bored, but something flickered in those brown eyes. Something Marcus couldn't quite name. She stopped 3 feet away, close enough that he caught the scent of her perfume. Jasmine, expensive. The kind that probably came in a bottle with a French name he couldn't pronounce. The words came out crisp, measured, each syllable perfectly enunciated. Mr. Reed, some of us manage to arrive before our children need to be in school. The observation landed like a slap. Marcus felt Emma's hand tighten in his, her humming cutting off mid-note. He wanted to respond, to explain that the bus had been late, that Mrs. Patterson couldn't watch Emma until 7:30, that he was doing the best he could as a single father working 50-hour weeks. But the words stuck in his throat, trapped behind years of learning when to speak and when silence served better. Tori didn't wait for a response. She turned and walked toward her private elevator, spine straight, shoulders back, the perfect picture of a woman who'd never questioned her right to judge others. Emma's whisper was small, uncertain, carrying the weight of a 7-year-old trying to make sense of adult cruelty. Daddy, why is she always mad at us? Marcus squeezed her hand, forced his voice to stay light even as something twisted in his gut. She's not mad, sweetheart. She's just busy. The lie tasted bitter. Tori Ashford wasn't busy when she made those comments. She was deliberate, calculated. Every cold remark, every dismissive glance, they were choices, not accidents of a packed schedule. As they stepped into the regular employee elevator, Marcus caught one last glimpse of Tori through the closing doors. She stood alone in her private car, and for just a second, so brief he might have imagined it, her mask slipped. Her jaw clenched. Her fingers gripped the handle of her briefcase until the knuckles went white. She was staring at Emma's dinosaur patch, and the expression on her face looked less like anger and more like pain. Then the doors closed, and the moment vanished. 3 floors up, in her corner office with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Boston's financial district, Tori set her briefcase down with more force than necessary. The leather made a sharp crack against the mahogany desk. She pressed her palms flat against the cool surface, head bowed, breathing carefully controlled. The dinosaur patch, the worn elbows on Marcus's jacket, the way Emma's sneakers were clearly a size too small, the canvas stretched tight over growing feet. Details she shouldn't notice, details that shouldn't matter. But they did matter, and that was the problem. She'd built her walls carefully over 8 years, brick by brick, until nothing could touch her, until she could walk through life untouched by the messy complications of caring. And yet somehow a 35-year-old software engineer with a broken wallet and a gap-toothed daughter and found cracks she didn't know existed. Tori straightened, smoothed her suit jacket, and turned to face the windows. The Boston skyline spread before her, gray and imposing under January clouds. This was her kingdom, her legacy. Her father had handed her the keys to Ashford Technologies with explicit instructions: be ruthless, be smart, and never let sentiment cloud judgment. She'd followed those instructions perfectly. The company thrived, revenue climbed, shareholders smiled, and she went home every night to an empty penthouse where the silence was so complete she could hear her own heartbeat. Somewhere below, Marcus Reed was probably settling Emma into the break room with her homework, apologizing to colleagues for the inconvenience, trying to be invisible despite the 7-year-old anchor that made invisibility impossible. Tori's reflection stared back at her from the window, sharp-featured and hollow-eyed despite the expensive makeup. She looked away. The first email arrived at 9:15. Marcus opened it, scanned the subject line, Q4 security report, revisions required, and felt his stomach sink. He'd spent 12 hours on that report. Every metric documented, every vulnerability cataloged, every recommendation backed by data. It was thorough. It was professional. It was exactly what Tori had requested. The body of the email contained a single line. Lacks executive summary. Resubmit by EOD. No greeting, no signature. Just the demand and the deadline. Marcus pulled up the original report. Right there on page 2 was a 2-paragraph executive summary. Clear, concise, exactly where it should be. Amy Chen, the junior developer who worked 2 cubicles over, rolled her chair into view. She was 26, brilliant with code, and possessed the kind of wide-eyed optimism that Marcus both envied and feared for. Everything okay? He closed the email, managed something approximating a smile. Yeah, just another revision request. Amy's expression shifted, sympathy mixing with wariness. From her? They never said Tori's name. It was always her or the CEO, or, in Derek Morrison's case, the Ice Queen, as if speaking her name might summon her attention. Marcus nodded. Amy winced. That's the 3rd one this month. What does she want? What did she want? That was the question Marcus couldn't answer. The criticisms were never substantive. They were nitpicks, technicalities, requests for changes that didn't improve the work. They just wasted time. It was like she was testing him, pushing to see how far he'd been before breaking. He reopened the report, found the executive summary, and moved it from page 2 to page 1. Changed the font from Calibri to Arial. Adjusted the line spacing. Made it look different without changing a single word of content. Then he hit send at 4:57, 3 minutes before her arbitrary deadline. The response came at 5:03, acceptable. One word, not good work, or thank you, or even received, just acceptable, as if his 12 hours of labor in the 3 he'd just wasted on cosmetic changes merited only the barest acknowledgement. Marcus shut down his computer, gathered his things, and went to collect Emma from the break room. She was curled up in one of the chairs, math homework spread across her lap, pencil moving in careful loops as she worked through multiplication tables. When she saw him, her whole face lit up with that gap-toothed grin that made every awful moment worthwhile. He drove them home through rush-hour traffic to their 2-bedroom apartment in Somerville, helped Emma with the rest of her homework, made dinner from whatever was left in the fridge, pasta again, because it was cheap and she didn't complain. After she was asleep, he sat at the kitchen table with his laptop and worked another 2 hours on a security patch that wasn't due until Friday, because staying ahead meant staying employed, and staying employed meant Emma had health insurance and a roof and a chance at a better life than this. His wallet sat on the table next to the laptop, held together with electrical tape where the leather had split. He'd owned it for 9 years. Bought it the week he started at MIT, back when he thought a computer science degree from one of the best schools in the country meant financial security. Before Sarah left. Before single parenthood taught him that security was an illusion and survival was a daily negotiation with spreadsheets that never quite balanced. The wallet could wait. The car's transmission made a grinding noise that probably meant expensive repairs, but that could wait too. Emma needed new shoes. That couldn't wait. The list in his head rearranged itself constantly, priorities shifting based on what crisis loomed largest. He looked at the clock. 11:30. He'd be up at 5:45 to do it all again. 2 weeks crawled past. Tori sent Marcus 14 emails, each one a small paper cut. Meeting invitations where his name was conspicuously absent despite the topic being his area of expertise. Questions about decisions she'd already approved. Requests for clarification on reports that were already crystal clear. The IT department noticed. They noticed when Marcus started arriving earlier, staying later, working through lunch at his desk instead of joining them in the break room. They noticed the tightness around his eyes, the way he flinched slightly every time his email pinged. Derek Morrison noticed too, and Derek was the kind of man who found other people's struggles entertaining. The coffee machine incident happened on a Tuesday. Marcus was refilling his mug, the ceramic one with MIT's logo that Emma had given him for Christmas, painstakingly wrapped in too much tape, when Derek sidled up with his usual smirk. Derek was 29, marketing team, the kind of guy who wore expensive sneakers to Casual Friday and made sure everyone knew they were limited edition. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, volume pitched just loud enough to carry, "Tough morning, Reed?" Marcus added cream, measured and careful. "Just the usual." Derek's colleague Brad joined them, sensing entertainment. "We were just talking about work-life balance. Must be hard bringing your kid in all the time." The implication hung there, ugly and deliberate. Marcus kept his voice level. "Emma's in the break room doing homework. She's quiet. She's not bothering anyone." Brad shrugged, all false innocence. Sure, just saying some of us have to arrange our lives around work instead of bringing our personal situations into the office." Marcus's jaw tightened. He wanted to explain that Mrs. Patterson had a doctor's appointment, that the after-school program was full, that he'd called 4 other babysitters before running out of options. But he didn't owe these men explanations, and they wouldn't care anyway. He started to turn away when Derek delivered his closing shot. "Must be nice having flexible hours. Maybe if we were the CEO's special project, we'd get the same perks." The insinuation was vile, and they all knew it. Marcus's hand tightened on his mug until he thought the ceramic might crack. But before he could formulate a response that wouldn't get him fired, a voice cut through the break room like a knife through silk. The voice was cold, precise, carrying the kind of authority that made grown men straighten their spines. "Gentlemen!" They turned. Tori stood in the doorway, and Marcus had no idea how long she'd been there or how much she'd heard. Her expression gave nothing away, the same neutral mask she always wore, but something in her posture suggested a predator that had just spotted prey. Derek's smirk faltered. "Miss Ashford, we were just—" She stepped into the room and he stopped talking. Her heels clicked against the linoleum, each step deliberate. She stopped 3 feet from Derek and Brad, close enough that they had to look up slightly to meet her eyes. When she spoke, her voice was steel-wrapped in ice. "Mr. Reed has saved this company from 2 cybersecurity breaches in the past 6 months. His work prevented millions in potential losses. If either of you spent half as much time on actual work as you do gossiping, perhaps you'd understand his value." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the coffee machine seemed to hold its breath. Tori let the words sink in before continuing, her tone dropping lower, more dangerous. "If I hear either of you discussing a colleague's personal circumstances again, you'll be interviewing elsewhere. Are we clear?" Derek's face had gone red. Brad was staring at his shoes. They both mumbled agreement before fleeing the break room like schoolboys dismissed from the principal's office. Marcus stood frozen, mug still in hand, trying to process what had just happened. Tori Ashford, the woman who'd made his life miserable for months, had just defended him, publicly, forcefully. She turned to face him, and for a moment their eyes met. Something passed between them, some current of understanding or confusion or recognition that neither could name. Then her mask clicked back into place. But Marcus saw what she didn't realize was visible. Her hands were trembling. She left without another word, disappearing back into the executive corridors where people like Marcus didn't belong. He stood alone in the break room, coffee going cold in his mug, mind reeling. Across the building, Tori locked her office door and pressed her back against it. Her breath came too fast, too shallow. Her hands still shook. She'd overheard them, the mockery, the insinuation, and something inside her had snapped with such force it terrified her. For 8 years, she'd maintained perfect control. She didn't get involved in office politics. She didn't defend employees from petty bullying. She stayed above the fray, untouchable and untouched. That was survival. That was safety. But hearing Derek Morrison's ugly insinuation about Marcus, about her and Marcus, had triggered something she thought she'd buried along with her ability to feel. She pushed away from the door, moved to her desk, and opened the bottom drawer. Inside, beneath quarterly reports and budget projections, lay a single folded piece of paper. Emma's drawing. Tori had meant to throw it away. She told herself a dozen times to crumple it up and toss it in the recycling. But instead, she'd unfolded it that first day, smoothed it flat, and studied it like an archaeologist examining ancient text. The ice princess who forgot how to smile. The crown was crooked, the briefcase was comically oversized. But the stars surrounding the figure, those were what caught Tori's attention. Not harsh lines or dark colors, but stars. Like Emma saw something worth celebrating instead of something to fear. When was the last time someone had looked at Tori Ashford and seen anything worth celebrating? She refolded the drawing, placed it back in the drawer, and closed it firmly. This was dangerous. This caring, this noticing, this feeling things for a man and his daughter. It was exactly what her father had warned against. Exactly what Daniel had taught her to fear. She had work to do. Numbers to analyze. Decisions to make. Things that mattered more than whether Marcus Reed thought she was a monster. Her reflection in the computer screen looked pale, drawn. She looked away and got back to work. Thursday night, 11:47. The emergency call came when Marcus was already in bed, Emma asleep in the next room. Critical server failure. Data corruption. Every IT professional's nightmare scenario unfolding in real time. He called Mrs. Patterson, apologized profusely, waited for her to arrive before driving through empty streets to the Ashford Technologies building. The security guard waved him through, Joe, who always had a kind word and never made Marcus feel less than for bringing his daughter to work. Marcus took the elevator to the server room, expecting to find the overnight tech or maybe one of the senior engineers. He didn't expect to find Tori. She stood in front of a bank of monitors, silk blouse untucked from her skirt, hair escaping from his usual perfect bun. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. She looked human, exhausted and worried, and nothing like the Ice Queen who delivered cutting remarks in marble lobbies. She registered his presence without surprise. "You're here." Not an accusation, not a criticism, just a statement of fact, and her voice carried a weariness that made her sound almost vulnerable. Marcus set down his laptop. "Server emergency. You?" She gestured at the screens. "Board presentation tomorrow morning. Won't matter if the system is corrupted." They worked in silence. Marcus ran diagnostics while Tori monitored backup protocols. 1 hour became 2. The building was tomb quiet, just the hum of servers and the click of keyboards and the occasional frustrated sigh when a solution proved elusive. Around 2 in the morning, Marcus's vision started to blur. He blinked hard, trying to focus on the lines of code, but they swam together. His hands shook slightly as he typed, subtle tremors he hoped Tori wouldn't notice. Her voice cut through his concentration, sharper than he expected. "When did you last eat?" He looked up, surprised she'd noticed anything beyond her own screen. "I don't remember." She studied him for a long moment, something unreadable flickering across her face. Then she stood and left the server room without explanation. Marcus returned to his diagnostics, assuming she'd gotten frustrated and decided to deal with the crisis remotely. But 10 minutes later, she reappeared carrying a wrapped sandwich and a bottle of water. She set them beside his laptop, not quite meeting his eyes. "Eat. You're useless if you collapse." The sandwich was from the executive lounge, probably leftovers from some catered meeting, but it was real food, and Marcus's stomach growled in response. He looked at her, trying to reconcile this version of Tori Ashford with the one who'd made his life hell for months. "Thank you." She didn't respond, just returned to her station and resumed working as if the gesture meant nothing. But Marcus noticed things too. Noticed how her breathing had become shallow and irregular. Noticed the way she gripped the edge of the desk when she thought he wasn't looking. Noticed that she'd been staring at the same screen for 5 minutes without typing a single command. At 2:45, she swayed. It was subtle, just a slight loss of balance, but her hands shot out to catch herself, knocking over her coffee cup. It was empty, but the noise seemed to startle her. Marcus was on his feet before thinking, "Are you okay?" She straightened immediately, armor snapping back into place. Fine. But she wasn't fine. Even from 6 feet away, Marcus could see the exhaustion etched into every line of her face. Whatever had driven her to stay here all night working herself to collapse, it wasn't just dedication. It was something darker. Something desperate. He took a step closer, keeping his voice gentle. "You don't look fine." The walls cracked, just for a moment, But Marcus saw it, saw past the CEO facade to the woman underneath who was barely holding together. Her voice came out thin, almost fragile. I haven't slept properly in 3 weeks. Board is questioning my leadership. Richard Caldwell is pushing for... She stopped herself, pressing a hand to her temple. Her eyes closed. When she opened them again, she seemed startled that she'd said anything at all. Marcus took another step. He should leave it alone, should focus on the servers and the crisis and maintaining proper professional boundaries. But he'd spent 4 months watching this woman be deliberately cruel, and now he was seeing something entirely different, something broken and human and achingly familiar. The words came out before he could stop them. The board is questioning your leadership? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Richard Caldwell thinks a woman can't run a Fortune 500 company. He's been building a case for months, looking for any weakness, any excuse to call for a vote of no confidence. Her voice cracked slightly on the last words. She swayed again, more pronounced this time, and Marcus moved on instinct. He crossed the space between them in 3 strides and caught her arms as she started to tip forward. His hands wrapped around her biceps, steadying her, and suddenly she was pressed against his chest, her perfume, that expensive jasmine, filling his senses. They both froze. Marcus was acutely aware of everywhere they touched, the warmth of her through the silk blouse, the way she fit against him, her head barely reaching his shoulder, the rapid flutter of her pulse visible at her throat. He was close enough to see gold flecks in her brown eyes, close enough to count her eyelashes, close enough that neither of them seemed to remember how to breathe. The moment stretched, suspended in amber. Marcus knew he should step back, knew this was crossing every line that mattered. But Tori's eyes were locked on his, and the vulnerability there was so raw, so unexpected, that moving seemed impossible. Her whisper barely made it across the inches between them. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. His response came automatically. It's okay. But it wasn't okay. Nothing about this was okay. They stood there, hearts beating too fast, the air between them charged with something neither could name. Marcus was suddenly aware of how long it had been since he'd been this close to anyone. Since Sarah left, he'd focused on Emma and work and survival. And touch had become something he'd forgotten to miss. Except now he remembered. And judging by the way Tori's breath had gone shallow, she was remembering things too. She pulled back first, stepping out of his grip with jerky movements that suggested panic barely contained. Color flooded her cheeks, not from exhaustion anymore, but something else entirely. She wouldn't meet his eyes. I should go. System's stable now. Marcus wanted to say something, wanted to ask what had just happened, wanted to understand why his heart was still racing. But Tori was already gathering her things with hands that shook worse than before, and the moment was collapsing around them like a house of cards. At the door, she paused, her back to him, voice barely audible. Marcus. It was the first time she'd used his first name. Not Mr. Reed or nothing at all. Just his name, and it sounded different in her voice than he'd expected. Softer, almost uncertain. He found his voice. Yeah. She turned halfway, still not quite looking at him. Thank you for tonight. Then she was gone, heels clicking rapidly down the hallway like she was running from something. Or towards something, Marcus couldn't tell which. He stood alone in the server room, surrounded by humming machines and blinking lights, and tried to make sense of what had just happened. Tried to understand why his hands still tingled where they'd held her arms. Tried to convince himself that the moment hadn't meant what his racing pulse suggested it meant. He failed on all counts. The drive home passed in a blur. Mrs. Patterson was asleep on the couch, and Marcus paid her double for the late night before carrying Emma from her bed to his car and then back to her room. He tucked her in, kissed her forehead, and sat on the edge of her bed watching her sleep. His daughter, his responsibility, his entire world compressed into one 7-year-old girl who deserved so much better than a father who couldn't afford new shoes and a mother who'd chosen a yoga instructor in San Diego over her own child. He thought about Tori's words. I haven't slept properly in 3 weeks. Thought about the exhaustion in her eyes and the tremor in her hands. Thought about how she'd looked pressed against him, vulnerable and afraid, and nothing like the armor-plated CEO everyone saw. Something had shifted tonight. Some fundamental understanding had cracked open, and Marcus didn't know what to do with it. Friday afternoon brought the quarterly board meeting, and Marcus wouldn't have known about it, except that Amy mentioned seeing executives filing into the conference room looking grim. He tried not to think about it, tried to focus on the encryption protocols he was updating, tried to ignore the knot of anxiety that had taken up residence in his stomach since Thursday night. But at 3:15, when he was walking past the main conference room on his way to print some documents, he heard raised voices. The door was thick oak, meant to contain confidential discussions, but anger had a way of carrying through even the best soundproofing. Richard Caldwell's voice, loud and sharp. Numbers are solid, but leadership is concerning. Ashford Technologies needs stability, not an emotional woman playing CEO. Marcus stopped walking. He shouldn't eavesdrop, should keep moving, but his feet wouldn't cooperate. Silence followed Caldwell's words. Then a voice Marcus didn't recognize. That seems... Caldwell cut them off. I'm proposing and we discuss whether Victoria's continued leadership serves the company's best interests. More silence. Marcus's hands curled into fists. He'd never met Richard Caldwell, but he knew the type. Old money, old boys club, old ideas about who deserved power and who should be grateful for scraps. The door opened. Marcus was still standing there, frozen like an idiot, when Tori emerged. She looked composed. Perfect posture, neutral expression, not a hair out of place. But Marcus had seen her vulnerable now, had held her when her walls came down, and he recognized the tightness around her mouth, the slight rigidity in her shoulders, the way she held herself like she was bracing for impact. Behind her, board members filed out in uncomfortable silence. Last came Richard Caldwell, 58, silver hair, expensive suit that screamed old money. He saw Marcus and dismissed him in one glance, the way people like Caldwell always dismissed people like Marcus. Tori started walking toward the elevators. Marcus followed before thinking it through. He caught up to her near the executive corridor. Miss Ashford? She turned, and for a split second he saw relief flicker across her face before the mask snapped back. Mr. Reed. They stood there, the formal names feeling wrong after Thursday night. After he'd held her and she'd thanked him, and something had changed that neither of them knew how to address. Marcus took a breath, lowered his voice so passing employees wouldn't hear. I heard some of what Caldwell said. Her expression didn't change, but something in her eyes went cold and distant. Then you heard a private board discussion. That's none of your concern. The words should have stung, should have reminded Marcus of his place, of the gulf between them, of all the reasons this conversation was a terrible idea. But he'd spent 4 months being pushed around by this woman, and he'd seen her vulnerable, and he was done pretending he didn't give a damn. His voice came out firmer than intended. It is my concern when someone who works for you overhears a board member being sexist garbage. Tori blinked, clearly not expecting that response. Some of the ice melted. That's not your fight. Marcus stepped closer, aware they were in a public hallway, but beyond caring. Maybe not, but I've spent 4 months thinking you were the coldest person I'd ever met. Then Thursday night, I saw something different. And now Caldwell is in there trying to tear you down, and everyone's just letting him. She stared at him, emotions warring across her face too fast for Marcus to track. Finally, she said, "Walk with me." They ended up on the rooftop garden, a space Tori had commissioned 2 years ago that remained largely unused. Boston spread out below them, the March wind cold and sharp, carrying the promise of spring that felt impossibly distant. Tori stood at the railing, hands gripping the metal, her back to Marcus. She was silent for so long he thought she might not speak at all. Then, I'm going to tell you something. Don't interrupt until I'm finished. Marcus nodded even though she couldn't see him. The words came slowly, painfully, like each one cost her something. When I was 24, I fell in love with a man named Daniel Hayes. He was a carpenter, built furniture with his hands. No college degree, no trust fund. My father despised him. She paused, taking a shaky breath. Marcus stayed silent. Her voice carried across the windswept rooftop, each word deliberate, as if she'd rehearsed this confession 1,000 times but never spoken it aloud. We were together for 2 years. I thought he was the most genuine person I'd ever met. I was going to introduce him at the company gala. I'd already picked out a ring to hint at. Marcus watched her knuckles turn white against the railing. The city sprawled below them, indifferent to the story unfolding above it. She continued, and now her voice held an edge like broken glass. Instead, 3 days before the gala, I found a bank statement in his truck. $75,000 deposited from one of my father's shell companies. The number hit Marcus in the chest. That kind of money could change someone's life, could pay off student loans, buy a house, give a 7-year-old girl everything she deserved instead of worn-out shoes and electrical taped wallets. Tori's hands trembled against the metal. Daniel had been feeding information to my father for 8 months. Stock tips, strategic plans, board meeting notes, everything I told him in confidence, he sold for the right price. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. He understood betrayal. Sarah had walked out with barely a goodbye, but this was different. This was calculated, purchased. The wind picked up, tugging strands of hair loose from Tori's bun. She didn't fix them. When I confronted him, he didn't even deny it, just looked at me and shrugged. Said my father offered him more money than he'd make in 5 years. Asked what I expected, that I'd have gotten bored of him eventually anyway. Her voice cracked on the last word. Marcus watched her shoulders hitch, watched her fight for composure with the same intensity she probably applied to quarterly reports and shareholder meetings. She wasn't finished. My father told me I should thank him, that he'd exposed Daniel before I made the mistake of marrying beneath my station. He said love makes you vulnerable, and vulnerability makes you useless in business. She turned finally, and the look in her eyes made Marcus's breath catch. Raw pain mixed with fury, mixed with something that looked like shame. So I learned the lesson. Stopped trusting people, stopped letting anyone close enough to hurt me, built walls so high that no one could climb them. The confession hung between them, heavy with implications Marcus wasn't ready to examine. He wanted to say something comforting, something wise, but his throat had gone tight. Tori took a step toward him, and now her voice dropped to something almost pleading. When I see you with your worn-out wallet and your devotion to Emma and your genuine kindness to everyone, I don't know what to do with that. It reminds me of everything I gave up, everything I thought I was too smart to believe in anymore. Another step. Close enough now that Marcus could see tears gathering in her eyes, the first tears he'd witnessed from her, maybe the first she'd allowed in years. Her final words came out barely above a whisper. You remind me of Daniel, but you're nothing like him. And that terrifies me. The silence that followed felt sacred, inviolable. Marcus processed what she'd given him, not just the story, but the trust it took to share it, to admit weakness to someone she'd spent months treating as beneath her notice. He found his voice, kept it gentle. So that's why you keep pushing people away. She didn't answer, just stood there with tears finally spilling over, tracking the mascara down her cheeks, and Marcus realized he was witnessing something extraordinary. Victoria Ashford crying, Victoria Ashford vulnerable, Victoria Ashford human. His instinct was to reach for her, to offer comfort the way he would for Emma when nightmares woke her. But this wasn't his daughter, and the rules governing this moment remained unclear. He settled for words instead. Tori, she cut him off, voice suddenly urgent. I need to go. She moved past him, nearly running for the rooftop door, and Marcus let her go. Watched her flee from her own honesty, from the connection sparking between them, from whatever this was becoming. He stood alone with Boston below him and questions swirling through his mind. Pulled his wallet from his pocket, that battered, taped-together artifact of a life lived on the edge of financial collapse, and stared at it like it might offer answers. Daniel Hayes had taken $75,000 to betray the woman he claimed to love. Marcus made $48,000 a year and could barely cover rent. The math of their situations was clear enough. But Marcus had never been good at math when it came to matters of conscience. Numbers didn't capture the way Emma's face lit up when he walked through the door. Didn't measure the satisfaction of solving a security breach no one else could crack. Didn't quantify the strange, terrifying pull he felt toward a woman who should represent everything wrong with his life, but instead made him want to understand what made her walls necessary in the first place. He pocketed the wallet and headed inside. The weekend stretched ahead, 48 hours of Emma and grocery shopping and pretending his world hadn't just tilted on its axis. Monday morning arrived with the weight of unspoken things. Marcus brought Emma through the lobby, bracing for another cutting remark, another reminder of his inadequacy. But Tori passed them with only a small nod. No words, no sneers, just acknowledgement that they existed in the same space. Emma noticed immediately, her voice pitched low. "Daddy, Miss Ashford didn't say anything mean." Marcus squeezed her hand. No, she didn't. The week that followed felt like walking through a dream where all the familiar landmarks had shifted slightly off-center. Tori sent 3 emails, routine stuff about system updates and security protocols, and not one contained a hidden barb or impossible demand. She passed him in hallways and nodded. She attended an IT briefing where Marcus presented on encryption improvements, and when he finished, she actually said the words that felt like they cost her physical pain to produce. "Good work, Mr. Reed." Amy pulled Marcus aside on Wednesday. "What happened? She hasn't sent you a single passive-aggressive email in over a week." He couldn't explain what he didn't fully understand himself. "I don't know." But he did know. Something had changed on that rooftop. Some mutual recognition of damage survived and walls constructed. Neither of them knew what to do with it, so they defaulted to careful politeness. The kind of politeness that felt more intimate than hostility, because it required choice instead of reflex. Thursday afternoon, Emma was coloring in the break room when Tori walked past. Marcus watched through the glass partition as his boss paused at the doorway. Wait, just paused. Emma looked up and waved with the unself-conscious friendliness of children who hadn't yet learned to fear authority. Tori waved back, a small wave, awkward and unpracticed, but genuine. Emma returned to her coloring, satisfied. Tori stood there for 5 more seconds before continuing down the hall, and Marcus felt something in his chest twist with an emotion he refused to name. That night, Emma was unusually quiet during dinner. Pasta again, because Marcus's paycheck didn't stretch to creativity. Finally, she set down her fork and fixed him with that too-old look she got sometimes. "Daddy, does Miss Ashford like sweet things?" The question came from nowhere. "I don't think so." Balm. Emma's expression turned crafty in a way that made Marcus nervous. Just wondering. He should have pressed for details, should have sensed that his 7-year-old was plotting something. But exhaustion made him careless, and he let the moment pass. Friday morning, Emma arrived with a small paper bag clutched carefully in both hands. Marcus eyed it with suspicion. "What's in the Em?" Her smile was pure innocence. Nothing. Nothing turned out to be a chocolate cupcake with pink frosting that had gotten slightly squashed during the bus ride. Emma had made it, with Mrs. Patterson's help, Marcus learned later, and she carried it through the lobby with the reverence of someone bearing a sacred offering. Marcus felt dread coil in his stomach. Honey, what are you planning to do with that?" She didn't answer, just marched directly toward the executive elevators where Tori stood checking her phone and Marcus followed helplessly, aware that whatever was about to happen would either be endearing or career-ending. Emma knocked on the elevator frame. Tori looked up, cycled through confusion, irritation, and something softer before settling on wary curiosity. Emma held up the bag. "I made this for you." Tori stared at the pack like it might contain a live grenade. "What is this?" Emma's voice carried that simple directness only children manage. "A cupcake. Daddy says you don't like sweet things, but I think you do. I think you just pretend not to." The statement landed with devastating accuracy. Marcus watched Tori's expression freeze, watched something crack behind her eyes. Around them, the lobby had gone silent. Security guards and early arriving employees were all witnessing this tiny act of rebellion against corporate hierarchy. Tori slowly took the bag, opened it, looked at the lopsided cupcake with its smeared frosting and slightly collapsed left side. Then she laughed, not a polite chuckle, not a sardonic snort, a real laugh, warm and surprised and completely unguarded. It transformed her face, erased years of carefully maintained severity, revealed the woman she might have been if Daniel Hayes and Gregory Ashford hadn't taught her that joy was a liability. Her voice came out softer than Marcus had ever heard it. "Thank you, Emma. It's perfect." Emma beamed with the satisfaction of a mission accomplished. "You should smile more." You look pretty when you smile. Marcus wanted the floor to swallow him, wanted to explain that his daughter had no filter and wasn't trying to be inappropriate. But Tori was looking at Emma with an expression Marcus couldn't quite parse, something between amusement and longing and profound sadness. She met Marcus's eyes across the lobby. The moment stretched, populated by dozens of watching employees and charged with everything unspoken between them. Neither looked away. Neither seemed capable of looking away. The acknowledgement passed silently. Things had shifted irreversibly, and there was no pretending otherwise. Emma tugged Marcus's sleeve, breaking the spell. "Daddy, we need to go or I'll be late." They left Tori standing by the elevators, cupcake in hand, smile still playing around her lips. Marcus glanced back once and saw her watching them go, and the look on her face made his heart do something complicated. That night, lying in bed while Emma slept in the next room, Marcus finally admitted what he'd been avoiding for weeks. He was falling for Victoria Ashford, falling for the complicated, damaged woman who'd made his life miserable because she was terrified of caring about anything, falling despite every logical reason to run the other direction. He had no idea what to do with that realization. The answer came Friday afternoon in the form of an email from Dr. Lisa Chen, HR Director. Subject: mandatory meeting, Tuesday 2 p.m. HR conference room. No context, no explanation, just a summons that made Marcus's stomach drop somewhere near his shoes. He found Amy in the break room. "Did you get an HR email?" She looked up from her sandwich. "No, why?" The floor tilted slightly beneath him. HR meetings meant problems. HR meetings with no context meant serious problems. His mind raced through possibilities. Had someone reported Emma's presence? Had he violated some policy he didn't know existed? Had Derek filed a complaint? Or, and this thought made his blood run cold, had someone noticed the change between him and Tori? Tuesday arrived with leaden inevitability. Marcus left Emma with Mrs. Patterson, citing a meeting he couldn't skip, and arrived at the HR conference room at exactly 2 o'clock. Dr. Chen was waiting, mid-40s, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, the sort of person who probably genuinely wanted to help, but operated within systems that often crush people in the name of policy. She gestured to a chair. "Mr. Reed, thank you for coming. This is a preliminary inquiry. We've received an anonymous complaint regarding inappropriate workplace conduct." The words hit like a physical blow. Marcus's mouth went dry. What kind of complaint? Dr. Chen consulted her notes with the careful neutrality of someone trained not to show bias. "The complaint alleges that you and Miss Ashford have been engaging in a romantic relationship, which violates our workplace policy regarding superior-subordinate relationships." His voice came out stranger than he intended. We're not, were they? They hadn't kissed, hadn't held hands, except for those few seconds in the server room when he'd caught her from falling. But the rooftop confession, the change in dynamics, the way they looked at each other, did those count as the beginning of something that would grow into what the complaint alleged? Dr. Chen's expression remained professionally sympathetic. "I need to ask you directly, Mr. Reed. Are you involved in a romantic relationship with Miss Ashford?" The honest answer felt more complicated than yes or no, but honesty was all Marcus had. "No, we're not." She made a note. "Have there been any romantic advance? Inappropriate communications?" He thought about Tori pressed against him in the server room, about the rooftop confession, about the way his heart raced when she smiled at Emma. But those weren't advances. They were moments of human connection in a world that demanded people remain isolated in their assigned boxes. "No." Dr. Chen studied him like she was trying to see past his words to the truth underneath. Finally, she leaned back. "Mr. Reed, I want to be clear. This company takes these matters seriously. We have a duty to investigate all complaints thoroughly. For now, please maintain professional distance from Miss Ashford. No one-on-one meetings without a third party present. No non-work-related communications." She paused, and something in her expression suggested the next words pained her. "I should also inform you that we're considering offering you a transfer to our Denver office. It would be a promotion. Principal engineer, significant salary increase. It might be advisable given the circumstances." Denver, 1,800 miles from Boston. From Emma's school and Mrs. Patterson, and the life they'd built from the wreckage of Sarah's abandonment. but also 1,800 miles from scrutiny and scandal and whatever was building between him and Tori that had made someone angry enough to file a complaint. His voice sounded distant to his own ears. "I'll think about it." Dr. Chen nodded. "No decision needs to be made immediately, but please consider it carefully." Marcus left the HR office feeling like he'd been hollowed out, returned to his desk in a daze, opened his email and started a message to Tori before remembering the new rules. No direct communication without witnesses. The investigation would take weeks, Dr. Chen had said. Weeks of forced distance and careful documentation and trying to prove a negative. Weeks of wondering who had reported them and why. Amy appeared at his cubicle, took one look at his face. What happened? He couldn't tell her, couldn't explain without making everything worse. Just some HR stuff. It's fine. Her skepticism was obvious, but she let it drop. Marcus turned back to his computer and stared at code that refused to make sense, while his mind churned through the impossible math of Denver versus Boston, promotion versus principal, protecting himself versus whatever he might be building with Tori. The office gossip started within 48 hours. Marcus heard the whispers in the break room, caught the speculative glances in meetings. Derek was suddenly friendlier, the kind of friendly that suggested he knew something and was enjoying watching Marcus squirm. On Thursday, Derek sidled up while Marcus was refilling his coffee. "Heard you had a meeting with HR. Everything okay?" The fake concern didn't mask the gleeful curiosity underneath. Marcus kept his voice flat. "Just routine stuff." Derek's smile suggested he didn't believe that for a second. Sure, although I heard it wasn't so routine. Something about inappropriate relationships?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "I don't know what you heard, but it's wrong." Derek held up his hands in mock surrender. "Hey, no judgment. Just seems like maybe the Ice Queen finally found someone cold enough to match her temperature." The implication was vile enough that Marcus's hands curled into fists. But before he could respond, before he could do something stupid that would prove every suspicion right, a familiar voice cut through the break room. Tori stood in the doorway and the temperature dropped 10 degrees. Her expression was controlled fury, the kind that made grown men check their insurance policies. "Mr. Morrison." Derek turned, smile faltering. "Miss Ashford, I was just—" She stepped into the room, heels clicking with ominous precision. "You were just spreading unfounded gossip about a colleague's personal life. Do you think this company pays you to invent stories or to actually work?" Derek's face went red. "I didn't mean—" Tori wasn't finished, and her voice dropped to something quietly lethal. "Mr. Reed is one of the most valuable members of this IT department. He's professional, skilled, and has more integrity in his worn-out shoes than you've demonstrated in your entire tenure here." The reference to his shoes hit Marcus somewhere tender. She'd noticed. Of course she'd noticed. Victoria Ashford noticed everything, filed it away, weaponized it when necessary, but this time the weapon was being deployed in his defense. She continued, each word sharp enough to draw blood. "If I hear you discussing Mr. Reed's personal life again, or anyone else's for that matter, you'll discover exactly how quickly HR can process a termination. Are we absolutely clear?" Derek fled. His colleagues scattered. The break room emptied like someone had pulled a fire alarm. Marcus stood alone with Tori, coffee forgotten in his hand. She turned to face him, and for just a second her mask slipped. He saw fear there, worry, something that looked like apology. Then she collected herself. "You should get back to work, Mr. Reed." She left before he could respond, before he could thank her or ask what she was thinking or point out that defending him so publicly would only fuel the rumors. He watched her go and felt the situation spiraling further out of control. That evening, he received another email, this time from Tori's executive assistant. "Miss Ashford requests your presence for a project briefing. Monday, 10 a.m., conference room B. Please confirm attendance." The email was professional, copied to 3 other IT staff members, entirely appropriate, but Marcus stared at it for 10 minutes before responding, trying to decode what it meant. Was this the one-on-one meeting HR had prohibited? Or was it legitimate work requiring his input? He confirmed attendance because refusing would raise more questions. But unease settled in his gut and refused to leave. The weekend passed in a blur of Emma and laundry and the creeping sense that his carefully constructed life was coming apart. Sunday night, Mrs. Patterson mentioned that Emma's school was having a spring fair in 2 weeks, the kind of event that required volunteering or donations or both, and Marcus had neither time nor money to spare. He added it to the mental list of things he couldn't quite manage, right below new shoes for Emma, and car transmission repair, and figure out what to do about Tori. Monday's meeting turned out to be legitimate, a briefing on upgrading the company's cybersecurity infrastructure. 4 people attended, discussion remained entirely professional, and Tori barely looked at Marcus beyond the standard acknowledgments required by courtesy. But as everyone filed out, she said quietly, "Mr. Reed, a moment, please." The other attendees left, the door closed. They stood on opposite sides of the conference table, careful distance maintained, no possibility of inappropriate contact, and the air between them felt charged enough to cause electrical fires. Tori's voice was carefully controlled. "I'm sorry about Derek. I shouldn't have intervened so publicly." Marcus shook his head. "You were defending an employee from harassment. That's your job." She finally met his eyes. "It's not my job to care whether Derek Morrison implies things about your personal life." The admission hung there, honest and dangerous. Marcus knew he should leave it alone, should back away from whatever cliff they were approaching. Instead, he heard himself say, "Is it true, the investigation?" Her face went carefully blank. "Durchen interviewed me last week. Asked the same questions she probably asked you." He waited. She continued, each word selected with precision. "I told her there was nothing inappropriate between us. That was technically accurate at the time." At the time, the qualifier suggested something had changed. Marcus's pulse quickened. "And now?" Tori looked away, out the conference room windows toward the Boston skyline. "Now, I don't know what we are, but I know maintaining distance is probably wise." Probably, not definitely, not certainly, just probably, the word a crack in her armor wide enough to slip hope through. Marcus took a step closer, not close enough to violate HR's directive, but closer than strictly necessary. "What if I don't want to maintain distance?" Her eyes snapped back to his, something fierce blazing behind the carefully constructed ice. "Then you're being foolish. Because this," she gestured between them, "whatever this is, it could cost you your job, your reputation, the stability Emma needs." Everything she said was true. Everything she said was practical and logical and exactly what someone like Victoria Ashford would calculate. But her voice shook on Emma's name, and Marcus realized she wasn't just protecting herself. She was trying to protect him. That realization made him reckless. "What if I think it's worth the risk?" Her control cracked visibly. She gripped the edge of the conference table. "You don't know what you're risking. My father destroyed the last person I let close. Richard Caldwell is looking for any excuse to remove me. The board already questions my judgment. If this becomes public..." She cut herself off, breathing hard. Marcus watched her fight for composure and saw the terrified woman underneath the CEO facade. He kept his voice gentle. "Then we're careful. We follow the rules. We don't give them ammunition." Her laugh was bitter. Someone already gave them ammunition. Someone filed that complaint, which means someone is watching us closely enough to notice what we're barely acknowledging to ourselves. The truth of that settled over them like ash. Someone had noticed. Someone cared enough to report it. Someone wanted one or both of them gone. Marcus's mind immediately went to Derek, but that felt too obvious. Derek was a bully, not a strategist. This took planning, patience, the kind of calculating malice that Derek lacked. Before he could voice the thought, Tori straightened. "I need to go. You should too. Someone will notice if we're in here too long." She moved toward the door but paused with her hand on the handle. "Marcus," his name again, not Mr. Reed, just Marcus, and it sounded like a confession. He waited. Her voice came out barely audible. "Be careful, please." Then she was gone, and Marcus stood alone in the conference room, wondering how caring about someone had become the most dangerous thing either of them could do. Word count, 1718. Part 2 incomplete, continuing. The investigation hung over them like a sword. 2 weeks passed in careful choreography, emails copied to multiple recipients, meetings never alone, interactions documented and witnessed. Tori attended different IT briefings. Marcus requested project assignments that minimized executive contact. They passed in hallways without speaking. And yet, Marcus caught her watching him sometimes, caught the way her expression softened for a fraction of a second before hardening again. Caught her fingers touching the spot on her arm where he'd steadied her in the server room, like she was remembering the contact. He wasn't any better. Found himself tracking her movements through glass walls, noting when she stayed late, worrying when she looked more exhausted than usual. Amy commented that he seemed distracted, and Marcus had no defense because he was distracted by a woman he couldn't have in a situation spiraling beyond his control. The call came on a Tuesday evening while Marcus was helping Emma with math homework. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. The voice was female, confident, familiar in a way that made his stomach clench. Hello, Marcus. 3 years. 3 years since he'd heard that voice, but he recognized it immediately. Sarah. Emma's head snapped up from her homework, eyes wide. Marcus forced his expression to stay calm even as his mind raced. Sarah never called. Not for birthdays or holidays or the dozens of small crises that marked Emma's childhood. She'd walked out and stayed out, and Marcus had built their life around her absence. Sarah's voice carried false brightness. How are you? How's Emma? He wanted to hang up, wanted to tell her she'd forfeited the right to ask those questions when she chose a yoga instructor over her daughter. But Emma was watching, and 7 was old enough to understand rejection even if it came from not allowing contact. We're fine. Why are you calling? Straight to the point, no pleasantries. Sarah had never appreciated his directness, and she didn't now. I'm in Boston. I'd like to see Emma. The floor tilted. You're here? Emma was mouthing questions Marcus couldn't answer. He held up a finger, 1 minute, and stepped into the kitchen, lowering his voice. When did you get here? Sarah's voice lost some of its artificial cheer. Last week. I've been getting myself settled. I'm ready to be part of Emma's life again. Ready, as if parenting was something you could toggle on and off like a switch. As if 3 years of absence could be erased by showing up and declaring readiness. Marcus's voice came out harder than intended. You left. You haven't called in 18 months. You can't just show up and expect. She cut him off, and now steel entered her tone. I'm her mother, Marcus. I have rights. Rights, the word lawyers use when they meant to weaponize parenthood. Marcus's grip tightened on the phone. What do you want, Sarah? A pause, then. I'm filing for joint custody. My lawyer says I have a strong case, especially given your current situation. Ice flooded his veins. What situation? Her voice dripped false sympathy. The investigation at work? The relationship with your boss? I've been doing my research, Marcus. A judge won't like that kind of instability around Emma. The world narrowed to the phone in his hand and the rushing sound in his ears. Someone had told Sarah. Someone had fed her information about the HR investigation. Someone wanted to use it against him. His voice came out deadly quiet. Who told you about that? Sarah laughed, bright and false. Does it matter? What matters is that Emma deserves stability, a proper home. 2 parents who aren't wrapped up in workplace scandals. Rage bubbled up from somewhere deep and primal. Rage at Sarah for abandoning them and returning only when it served her purposes. Rage at whoever had weaponized his situation. Rage at a system that would even consider giving custody to a woman who'd voluntarily walked away. But rage wouldn't help. Rage would make things worse. So Marcus swallowed it down and said through gritted teeth, "You'll be hearing from my lawyer." He hung up before she could respond, stood in the kitchen with his hands shaking and his mind racing through the implications. Joint custody meant Emma split between homes, meant instability and confusion, and watching his daughter pack a bag every other weekend, meant Sarah's new boyfriend. Because of course there was a new boyfriend. There was always a new boyfriend, playing father to his child. Emma appeared in the doorway, small and scared. Daddy, was that Mom? He crouched down, pulled her into a hug that was as much for him as her. Yeah, baby, that was Mom. Her voice was muffled against his shoulder. Why did she call? How did you explain to a 7-year-old that her mother, the woman who'd left when Emma was 4 and barely remembered her now, wanted to suddenly re-enter their lives? How did you explain custody battles and legal fights and the ugly reality that sometimes parents use children as weapons? You didn't. You lied and hoped the truth came later when she was old enough to understand. She wanted to say hello, see how you're doing. Emma pulled back, and her eyes were too knowing. Is she coming back? The careful phrasing, not is she staying, but is she coming back, suggested Emma remembered more than Marcus realized. Remembered the fights and the slammed doors, and the morning she woke up to find her mother's closet empty. He chose honesty. I don't know yet, sweetheart. But whatever happens, you and me, we're solid, okay? She nodded, but worry creased her small forehead. Marcus kissed it and sent her back to finish homework, then pulled out his phone with hands that still trembled. The family lawyer he'd used for the divorce was named Tom Brennan, mid-50s, decent guy, had given Marcus a break on fees when Sarah left. Marcus called his emergency line. Tom answered on the third ring. Marcus, been a while. No time for small talk. Sarah's back. She's filing for joint custody and using the HR investigation at my work as evidence of instability. Silence on the other end. Then Tom's voice, carefully neutral. Tell me about this investigation. Marcus explained the anonymous complaint, the allegations of inappropriate relationship with Tori, the lack of actual evidence because nothing had happened. But even as he spoke, he heard how it sounded, heard the implications a judge might draw. Tom was quiet for a long moment. Marcus, I need to be honest with you. Any custody challenge is serious. But if Sarah can demonstrate workplace instability or inappropriate relationships, he trailed off. Marcus filled in the blanks. It hurts my case. Tom's voice was gentle but firm. Yes, judges favor stability above almost everything. Sarah's 3-year absence works in your favor, but if she can prove that she's changed and you're in a questionable situation. Marcus closed his eyes. What do I do? Another pause, then. The Denver transfer. If it's still available, you should take it. New city, fresh start, away from the investigation. Shows you're prioritizing stability. Denver. The promotion he'd been avoiding thinking about. The escape route that meant ripping Emma from everything familiar. His voice came out hollow. And if I don't want to leave? Tom's sigh carried down the line. Then we fight. But I can't promise we win. And fighting means Emma testifies. Means dragging her through questions about whether she feels safe with you, whether she's seen inappropriate behavior. Is that what you want? Of course it wasn't what Marcus wanted. Emma had been through enough when Sarah left. The therapy sessions and the nightmares and the slow, painful process of learning to trust that her father wouldn't disappear too. But Denver meant leaving Tori, meant running from something that might matter, meant making his life even smaller to accommodate other people's judgments. He thanked Tom and hung up without making promises. Sat at his kitchen table and stared at nothing while Emma finished her homework in the next room. The next morning, Marcus arrived at work to find the gossip had evolved. Now people weren't just whispering about him and Tori, they were taking sides. Amy and a few others defended him. Derek's crowd implied he was trying to sleep his way to a promotion. Most stayed neutral, waiting to see which way the wind blew. He kept his head down, focused on work, tried to ignore the sensation of being watched. But at lunch, when he went to the cafeteria, he saw Tori. She stood near the salad bar, and for just a moment, their eyes met across the crowded room. The distance between them felt infinite. She looked away first. Marcus grabbed a sandwich and left without eating in the cafeteria. Couldn't stand the stares or the whispers or the weight of everything unsaid between them. That afternoon, Dr. Chen sent another email. Mr. Reed, following our previous conversation, I wanted to inform you that the Denver position remains available. The hiring manager there is eager to bring you on board. Please let me know your decision by end of week. End of week. 4 days to decide whether to run or stay and fight. He closed the email without responding and tried to focus on code that refused to cooperate. But his mind kept circling back to the same impossible choice. Protect Emma or protect whatever was building with Tori. Be smart or be honest. Run or stay. Thursday afternoon, as Marcus was leaving to pick Emma up from school, He passed through the lobby and saw them. Tori and Derek standing near the elevators in what looked like a tense conversation. Derek was smiling that same cruel smile, and Tori's expression was carved from ice. Marcus should have kept walking, should have left well enough alone. But something in Tori's posture, rigid, defensive, barely controlled, made him pause. Derek's voice carried, "Just saying, Miss Ashford, maybe if you'd maintain better professional boundaries, we wouldn't be dealing with this mess." Tori's response was too quiet to hear, but her hands curled into fists. Derek wasn't finished. "Although I suppose when you're desperate enough." Marcus didn't plan it, didn't think it through, just found himself crossing the lobby, inserting himself between Derek and Tori. "That's enough." Derek turned, surprise flickering across his face before settling into amusement. "Reed, shouldn't you be—" Marcus cut him off, voice low and dangerous. "Walk away. Now." Something in his tone must have penetrated Derek's thick skull, because the smirk faded. He looked between Marcus and Tori, calculating, then shrugged. "Whatever. This place is turning into a soap opera anyway." He left. The lobby suddenly felt very quiet. Marcus turned to Tori, who was staring at him with an expression he couldn't parse. Part shock, part something that looked like gratitude, part anger. Her voice came out strained. "You shouldn't have done that." He knew she was right, knew he'd just given the gossips more ammunition. But he'd watched this woman defend him twice now, watched her take hits meant for him, and couldn't stand by while Derek took shots at her. Probably not. They stood there 3 feet apart, close enough to talk quietly, far enough to maintain plausible deniability. The lobby's security cameras were recording everything. Employees were definitely watching. Marcus didn't care anymore. Tori seemed to be fighting some internal battle. Finally, quietly, "There are things happening. Things I can't tell you about yet, but you need to be careful." Before he could ask what she meant, she walked toward the executive elevators, leaving Marcus alone with more questions than answers. That night, Emma asked about Denver. Somehow, because children always somehow knew, she'd overheard him talking to Tom. She sat on her bed, pajamas on, hair still damp from the bath. "Are we moving to Denver?" Marcus sat beside her, wishing he had better answers. "I don't know yet, Em, maybe." Her voice got very small. "I don't want to leave. Mrs. Patterson is here, and my school, and my friends." Everything she named was true. Everything she'd built over 3 years of stability was rooted in Boston. Moving meant ripping all that out. But staying meant the custody fight, meant Emma testifying, meant watching his daughter become a weapon in adult conflicts. He pulled her close. "Whatever happens, you and me, we're together. That's what matters most." She nodded against his chest, but he felt her tears soaking through his shirt. After she fell asleep, Marcus sat in his living room and made a decision he immediately questioned. Pulled out his phone, opened a new email. Addressed it to Victoria Ashford, then stopped. Dr. Chen had said no non-work communications. The investigation was ongoing. Every email was probably being monitored, but he needed Tori to know about Sarah, needed her to understand why Denver might not be a choice but a necessity. He compromised, sent a carefully worded message. "Miss Ashford, regarding the Denver position, there have been developments in my personal situation that may require consideration. I wanted to inform you as a courtesy. Marcus Reed." Professional, vague, documented proof he'd communicated appropriately about a job decision. Her response came 20 minutes later. "Mr. Reed, please schedule time with my assistant to discuss. This deserves a proper conversation. VA." The initials felt like a small intimacy, like she couldn't quite bring herself to sign it Miss Ashford or Victoria, but needed to bridge the gap somehow. He scheduled the meeting for Monday, 3 days away. 3 days to figure out how to explain that the life he'd built was collapsing, and she was somehow central to both the collapse and the only thing that made him want to stay and fight. The weekend passed in a fog. Saturday brought Sarah to his doorstep, actually showed up, looking tanned and healthy and like the past 3 years had treated her far better than they'd treated Marcus. Emma was at a friend's house. Sarah knew this. She'd planned it. "We need to talk." Marcus didn't invite her in, stood on his threshold blocking entry. "You can talk to my lawyer." Sarah's expression hardened. Don't be difficult, Marcus. I'm trying to do what's best for Emma. The laugh that escaped him was devoid of humor. You left her. You chose a yoga instructor over your daughter. Now you want to talk about what's best for her? She flinched but recovered quickly. I was sick, Marcus. Depressed. I needed help. He might have believed her if she'd called even once during those 3 years. Might have sympathized if she'd sent birthday cards or asked about Emma's first day of school or shown any interest in the child she'd abandoned. But she hadn't, and her sudden concern felt calculated rather than genuine. Get help, Sarah. Get better. But you don't get to walk back into Emma's life and pretend you didn't choose to walk out. Her voice dropped to something coldly furious. My lawyer says I have a strong case, especially with your current situation. So you can cooperate and make this easy, or we can do this the hard way. Marcus stepped forward, forcing her back. The hard way, then, because I will fight you with everything I have to protect my daughter from someone who's proven she can't be trusted. He closed the door in her face, stood on the other side with his heart pounding and his hands shaking, and wondered if he just made things infinitely worse. Monday morning arrived with the weight of everything Marcus couldn't control pressing against his chest. The meeting with Tori was scheduled for 10, and he'd rehearsed a dozen different ways to explain Sarah's return without sounding like he was asking for help. Because he wasn't asking for help, he couldn't ask for help, not when helping him might cost Tori everything she'd built. But at 9:30, his phone buzzed with a text from her assistant. Miss Ashford requests you come to her office now instead of conference room. Door will be open, assistant present for propriety. The change felt significant. Her office meant privacy within documented boundaries, meant something important enough to bend protocol without breaking it. Marcus arrived to find Tori's assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia, who'd worked for the company longer than Tori had been CEO, stationed at a desk just inside the door. She nodded toward the inner office. Go ahead, I'll be right here if you need anything. The emphasis on the last word suggested she was there as much to protect them as to observe them. Tori stood by the windows overlooking Boston, backlit by morning sun that turned her silhouette into something both imposing and fragile. She turned when Marcus entered, and the exhaustion in her eyes suggested she'd slept as poorly as he had. Her voice was carefully professional. Mr. Reed, thank you for coming. Please sit. He sat in one of the chairs facing her desk. She remained standing, maintaining the physical advantage of height, even as her posture suggested she was bracing for impact. The silence stretched until Marcus broke it. You said there were things happening, things you couldn't tell me about. Tori's hands gripped the back of her desk chair. Richard Caldwell is planning something. I don't have proof yet, but he's been meeting with board members. Private meetings I'm not invited to. My sources suggest he's building support for a no-confidence vote. The admission cost her. Marcus could see it in the way her jaw tightened. Victoria Ashford didn't share weakness easily, and acknowledging her position might be in jeopardy was equivalent to admitting defeat. He kept his voice steady. When? She finally moved, circling the desk to sit across from him, maintaining appropriate distance but allowing the conversation to feel less like an interrogation. This week, Wednesday, he's using the HR investigation as ammunition, suggesting my judgment is compromised, that I'm allowing personal feelings to interfere with business decisions. Marcus felt anger kindle in his gut. You've done nothing wrong. Her laugh was bitter and tired. Perception matters more than reality in boardrooms, and the perception is that I defended you too publicly, too emotionally, that I let whatever this is between us cloud my professional responsibilities. Whatever this is, the phrase hung between them, undefined but undeniable. Marcus leaned forward. What do you need me to do? Tori's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Take the Denver position. Remove yourself from the equation. If you're gone, Caldwell loses his leverage. The investigation concludes with nothing found. My judgment is vindicated by making the difficult but appropriate choice to transfer you. Every word made logical sense. Every word felt like a knife between his ribs. His voice came out rougher than intended. Is that what you want? She looked away, out the windows toward the city they both called home. What I want is irrelevant. What matters is protecting this company and the 1,500 people who depend on it for their livelihoods. The deflection was answer enough. Marcus stood, unable to sit still while his world realigned itself. I have my own reasons for considering Denver. My ex-wife came back. She's filing for custody and using the investigation as proof I'm providing an unstable environment for Emma. Tori's head snapped toward him, shock breaking through her careful composure. What? He explained Sarah's return, the phone call, the threat of joint custody. Watch Tori's expression shift from shock to fury to something that looked like anguish. When he finished, her voice was barely above a whisper. This is my fault. Marcus moved closer, not close enough to violate the invisible boundaries, but close enough to make his point. This is Sarah's fault for abandoning her daughter. This is whoever filed the complaint's fault for weaponizing a relationship that barely exists. This is not your fault for being human enough to care about someone. The words landed harder than he intended. Tori's eyes glistened with tears she wouldn't let fall. Her voice came out strained. You should take Denver. Protect Emma. That matters more than... She stopped herself, but Marcus heard what she didn't say. More than us. More than whatever fragile thing they'd built in stolen moments in defended territory. Patricia knocked on the doorframe. Miss Ashford, yours 10:30 is here. The interruption felt both intrusive and perfectly timed. Marcus stepped back, rebuilding the professional distance. I'll let you know my decision by end of week. Tori nodded, mask sliding back into place. Thank you for informing me, Mr. Reed. He left her office feeling like he'd just agreed to something irrevocable without actually agreeing to anything at all. Tuesday brought the blog article. Corporate scandal splashed across tech industry sites with enough accurate details to suggest an inside leak. Marcus read it twice, feeling walls close in. By afternoon, 3 different news outlets had picked up the story. Ashford Technologies stock dipped 2%. Amy found him at his desk. This is going to get worse before it gets better. She wasn't wrong. By evening, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Sarah's lawyer. Article strengthens our position. Judge will see this instability. Reconsider cooperation. He deleted the message and tried to focus on Emma's homework, but the noose tightened with every passing hour. Wednesday morning, Marcus woke to find an unexpected visitor on his doorstep. The knock came at 7, and when he opened the door, Emma still asleep, he found himself face to face with a man in his early 60s. Silver hair, expensive suit, bearing that spoke of unchallenged authority. The man extended his hand. Mr. Reed, I'm Gregory Ashford. We need to talk. Marcus's mind raced. Tori's father, the architect of her walls, standing here asking to talk. Gregory didn't wait for invitation. The board votes today at 2. I'm going to testify about what I did to Victoria 8 years ago, about Daniel Hayes and the coercion and the manipulation. She doesn't know I'm doing this. He pulled out a folder. These are bank statements, emails, phone records, everything that proves I destroyed her ability to trust people. I'm hoping it reframes the narrative, that her caution around relationships isn't weakness, it's survival. And her willingness to trust you now is extraordinary strength. Marcus took the folder, processing implications. Why are you telling me? Gregory's expression carried genuine regret. Because I owe her the truth, and because you remind me of Daniel in the ways that matter. Genuine kindness, integrity that can't be bought. But you're stronger than he was. You won't let anyone push you into betraying her. He turned to leave, then paused. Don't take Denver, Mr. Reed. Stand and fight. It's what Victoria needs to see, that not everyone runs when things get complicated. The board meeting started at 2. Marcus wasn't invited, but he positioned himself in the hallway outside, close enough to offer silent support, far enough to maintain propriety. Patricia had texted him the location, a quiet act of rebellion against rules that felt increasingly arbitrary. Board members filed past. Richard Caldwell arrived with the confidence of someone who'd already counted votes. Then Gregory Ashford emerged from the elevator, and Caldwell's expression flickered. The doors closed. Marcus waited, checking his watch every 30 seconds while time crawled. 40 minutes passed. An hour. Voices rose behind oak doors but remained indistinct. Finally, the doors opened. Board members emerged looking shell-shocked. Margaret Chen paused near Marcus. She won. Caldwell's motion was tabled. Your restructuring satisfied concerns. Relief nearly buckled Marcus's knees. Tori appeared last, and when she saw Marcus, something in her expression cracked. Not here, her eyes said, but later. Caldwell stormed past, face purple with rage. This isn't over. But it was over, at least for now. Marcus watched Tori disappear into her office and waited. 20 minutes later, Patricia appeared. Rooftop, she's waiting. Marcus found Tori at their railing, Boston spread below. She turned when she heard him approach, and tears tracked mascara down her cheeks. Her voice came out raw. My father testified, told everyone about Daniel, about the coercion, about destroying my ability to trust people. He had documentation, emails, bank records, everything. Marcus moved to stand beside her. I know, he came to see me this morning. She looked at him, surprise breaking through pain. He did? Marcus nodded, gave me copies of everything, said I reminded him of Daniel but stronger, that I wouldn't run when things got complicated. Tori's laugh was wet and broken. I spent 8 years hating Daniel, and now I find out my father manipulated him into betraying me, made him choose between me or losing everything. Her hands gripped the railing. What if Daniel loved me? What if I blamed the wrong person? Marcus kept his voice gentle. Then you survived something that should have destroyed you, and now you get to choose differently. She studied his face. You didn't take Denver. Not a question. A statement that carried weight. His response was simple. No, I didn't. Her next words came barely above a whisper. Sarah's custody hearing is tomorrow. This could hurt your case. Marcus reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. The first deliberate touch beyond necessity. Then we fight. Together. Tori's fingers laced through his. Together. They stood there while afternoon faded, holding hands above a city that had tried to break them and failed. The custody hearing the next day felt surreal. Courthouse fluorescent lights, linoleum floors, Sarah across the aisle with her expensive lawyer. Emma waited in a children's room, spared from testifying. Jennifer Walsh presented Sarah's case. Depression overcome, stability achieved, maternal rights deserved. Then produced the blog article. Mr. Reed's workplace situation suggests ongoing instability. Tom Brennan countered with Gregory Ashford's sworn statement about manipulation. The closed HR investigation with no findings, documentation that Marcus no longer reported to Tori. Then played his final card, character witnesses. Mrs. Patterson testified about 3 years of consistent care. Emma's teacher described a well-adjusted child with a devoted father. Amy Chen spoke to Marcus's professionalism despite manufactured scandal. Judge Patricia Morrison reviewed everything with methodical attention. Finally, she looked at Sarah. Miss Reed, your 3-year absence is deeply concerning. Mr. Reed has provided stable, consistent care. While workplace complications were noted, they've been appropriately resolved. Her verdict came crisp and final. Petition for joint custody is denied. Ms. Reed may apply for supervised visitation after demonstrating 6 months of consistent contact. Sarah's face went white. Marcus exhaled for what felt like the first time in days. Outside, Tom clapped his shoulder. You did good. Marcus pulled out his phone, texted Tori. We won. Her response was immediate. Told you, together. Spring transformed Boston from gray to green, and Marcus's life transformed with it. The scandal faded as newer corporate drama emerged. Richard Caldwell resigned quietly after SEC investigation found securities violations. Marcus's promotion to principal engineer meant better pay and, crucially, no reporting conflict with Tori. They dated carefully, building something real without scrutiny's weight. Emma adjusted faster than expected, started calling Tori by her first name, drew pictures that included 3 figures instead of 2. Gregory and Tori rebuilt slowly. Weekly lunches, careful conversations, forgiveness measured in inches. 6 months dissolved like snow in March rain. February arrived with record results and company celebration. Ashford Technologies posted its best year, 35% revenue growth, major contracts, industry recognition. Tori gave a speech thanking everyone, And when she mentioned engineering division excellence, her eyes found Marcus across the room. The smile she gave him wasn't CEO polished but genuine. The smile Emma had first coaxed out with lopsided cupcake. After celebration wound down, Marcus found Tori on the rooftop garden, their place, where walls had first cracked open. She stood at the railing, city lights below, and turned when she heard him. Couldn't stay at the party? He moved beside her. Wanted to see you, without 200 witnesses. She laughed. Still worried about scrutiny? Marcus pulled a small box from his pocket. Tori's breath caught. He opened it. Simple ring, elegant, nothing ostentatious. I know this is complicated. I know your board will have opinions. I know we've only officially dated 6 months. He took her hand. But I've been falling for you since you defended me from Derek. Since you restructured the company to protect us. Since you chose vulnerability over safety. His voice roughened with emotion, and I'm done waiting for perfect moments because every moment with you feels perfect enough. Her eyes were bright with tears. He started to kneel, but she pulled him up, laughing through tears. Don't kneel to me. We're equals, or this doesn't work. His smile widened. Victoria Ashford, will you marry me? Her response came fierce and immediate. Yes, 1,000 times yes. He slid the ring on her finger, kissed her while February snow started falling around them, soft and clean and new. From the rooftop door, a small voice. Did she say yes? They turned. Emma stood with Mrs. Patterson, both grinning like conspirators. Emma ran forward, hugged them both. Finally, I told you she liked sweet things. Tori laughed, scooped Emma up. You were right, sweetheart. I do like sweet things, especially you. Mrs. Patterson dabbed her eyes. Not crying, just allergies. They stood together, 4 people who'd found family in unexpected places, while Boston sparkled below and snow fell gentle. Marcus looked at Tori holding Emma, at Mrs. Patterson beaming, at the ring catching light, and felt something he'd thought lost after Sarah left. He felt complete. Tori met his eyes over Emma's head, voice soft with wonder. Thank you. He knew what she was thanking him for, not the proposal, but the courage to trust again. To believe walls weren't safety, but prisons. To choose connection despite every reason to run. His response carried weight earned through months of fighting. Thank you for teaching me that love isn't weakness. It's the bravest thing we can do. Boy, Emma looked between them. Can we get hot chocolate now? It's cold. They laughed and headed inside. Marcus, Tori, Emma, and Mrs. Patterson. Family formed by choice rather than obligation. By courage rather than convenience. By the radical decision to care despite risk. The rooftop garden stood empty behind them, snow covering the railing where Tori had first confessed her wounds and Marcus had first understood that some walls were meant to come down. Boston blazed with light and possibility below, and for the first time in 8 years, Victoria Ashford wasn't afraid of tomorrow. She had Marcus beside her, Emma holding her hand, and the knowledge that surviving pain didn't mean avoiding it forever. It meant learning to trust that some people were worth the risk of being hurt. And Marcus Reed, with his worn wallet and his genuine kindness, and his daughter who saw goodness where others saw weakness, had proven himself worth every risk she'd taken. They stepped into warmth together, leaving footprints in fresh snow that would melt by morning, but marked this moment as theirs, imperfect, hard-won, and absolutely real.